The nature in which we sometimes look at media ends up being the case of a parasocial lens grafted onto something to where we've staked so much attachment towards it, we're kind of blurring the lines between what is a fandom and honestly what is a community. To be also, what do we insert ourselves into to then insert our own form of gratification and or vitriol onto people that have nothing to do with our personal lives. That diatribe aside, welcome everyone back to Nomadic Opinions. So, the thumbnail is a lie, because I'm going to be talking about Critical Role's third campaign and about how the critters have handled it, but I'm not going to be angry for this one. There is a version of me out there where I am super pissed at every single person that calls himself a critter, but that was also me battling a lot of stuff like the flu and the desire to burn an entire film to the ground because it was that terrible of a movie experience. But we're just going to talk about it like this. I do not care that much about Campaign 3 as a personal person in the critter community because honestly, Bell's Hells is interesting, but I wouldn't say it's like a focal group for me, as it were. Like, there are interesting concepts, sure, like Chetney Pokapee being the oldest and probably the most durable blood hunter that has been in the game thus far. I'm sorry, Molly. You could have lived a lot longer if it wasn't for those dice rolls. Ashton is kind of an interesting punk barbarian that's actually kind of interesting to kind of pick apart how he's just this anarchist that kind of got away with everything because of dice rolls of all things and having a loaded gun by your side. Even things like FCG and Laudna's characters being these older beings that have such a sad history to them when you honestly think about it, they're all compelling. Even having Orem, who is arguably the leader of Bell's Hells, but you give the crown to Imogen because her main story is tied to a lot of things surrounding the focal villain of not just the campaign, but for probably the linchpin into a lot of different story arcs that have been going on for 10 years. It's a lot. But why is it divisive for other people? Well, it could go into diatribe about the parasocial abnormalities that come from critters that try to say how they would rule a game, how they would dictate how people should play their own characters, what their gripes are about people sometimes injecting themselves into their own characters, where if you've ever been in a TTRPG table, that's kind of a constant, really. A lot of players do that, really, just insert a lot into their characters, and they themselves end up producing very interesting beings altogether. That's sometimes the nature of it. But I honestly think some of it is from people's expectations being set so high for a campaign that, honestly, when you look at the behind the scenes factors, kind of was doomed in any retrospect that you really think about. Like, let's honestly peel back the layers. Originally, it was going to be in Marquette for everything because they had a lot of people for the consultation for cultural appropriations as well as cultural awareness to make sure no one felt like they were outside of the target demographic or that they were insulted or there were any racial things that would go for allegations. They did everything that they could for inclusivity. But then it's also that the plot evolves into places where it needed different ground in areas that weren't just the central location that they were sitting in. That is a given for a lot of things involving the story here and there. Then we go into stuff involving how They were setting things up to demonstrate different marketing ideas with Hasbro and with D&D as a whole to showcase the brand new stuff of Spelljammer. We then get the OGL issues as well as some other stuff behind the scenes about what D&D has been doing with their companies and how they've handled stuff. And we're then ripping that stuff away to then open up other things that kind of leave it to where you're seeing blueprints of other stories that were supposed to happen, but behind the scenes stuff had to axe them out. Maybe the airship they got from Estros was supposed to be an actual spaceship for them to go in space. Maybe it wasn't. We'll never know. But the recipe of things was there. It was going to be included in these sort of things. But business stuff behind closed doors, where no one else is in the room where it happens, sometimes really goes into play. That's just the nature of business. But at the same time, one of the bigger issues I've seen people talk about is how the story never felt how it went to where they were going. But I think that also goes back into the antithesis of my whole arguments, then go back to the beginning of what I was saying at the very start of the video about this being a parasocial problem rather than it being something of a natural criticism when you really peel back the layers, when you're understanding the business side, as well as how it's just trying to insert people's own expectations and what they would do onto the table of people that have been playing together for well over a decade. And I think that's the main problem I have with this, not the campaign, but critters as a whole. You guys will never know this, but I have sat down with many a critter talking about how they were fed up with the campaign because it wasn't going in their direction. Why? Various reasons. Many of which were just how they thought people weren't playing characters that they expected them to play as, from how they were being scripted and written. But at the same time, guys, let's also remember this key factor where a lot of people in comment sections are just gonna try and fight me on this because they fought other people on this message and method. I like how people want to say that because they're a business, they have to do certain things that are congruent towards a business model. Some would say it's from the camera angles, or they think certain things are scripted to make sure that the plot goes really, really further along, to make sure it facilitates other stuff. Other people are just trying to say that Matt's trying to do things from other DMs that he's never done before, and it's this, that, and a third thing for a reaction. If it were just a criticism on certain factors like how they're handling stuff for business, or Matt trying to overextend himself, I would have no issue. But when it comes to how they're saying how people should be playing characters, how they shouldn't be playing characters, how certain characters are being too annoying and too preachy because of this, that, and a third thing, I gotta step in and then just remind people that this is from a long-standing story from over a decade that started as a home game, and despite the fact this is a full-blown business, is still in its roots a home game. They just have now the method to share it with us around the world. They don't have to. They're busy people with their own businesses going on. Sometimes it would be just for merchandise stuff. Maybe it'd also be for books, maybe for comic books. They don't have to do a TTRPG. Reslayer's take and the unended stuff with the Mist team has proven that enough. They don't need to play games for us. They don't need to do anything. What they're doing is what they're enjoying. But they don't have to do it, guys. They never have. So, what are we doing in this whole big complaint sphere at this moment? Is it really gonna make everybody happy if you just sat at this table with all 7 to 8 people and then just tell them what they should do? Would it make you happy? Because I know for whatever you would want to do would make the next person unhappy. Why? because it's not your game. These aren't your characters. This isn't your table. You guys like EXU Calamity and Downfall? That's great. You can watch that all day. No one's stopping you. No one is stepping in to stop you at all. You guys don't like how certain people did stuff in an ongoing campaign? Tough titty. Not your game. Just trying to rip the band-aid off. Not your game. You guys can have your complaints, sure, but don't make it a parasocial nightmare. That is all I'm asking. So yeah, you guys could probably sit down, probably type a whole big dissertation about how I, V, am in the wrong for saying all these things and that you're not in a parasocial thing with this. You're totally a normal critter. You're totally not just trying to use your voodoo dolls to say what everyone in the cast and crew should be doing for your amusement. Or you could sit down with me and just talk it out of like, okay, maybe I took it a step too far. Let's talk about what I really had a problem with. Because maybe this campaign isn't as bad or as deep as I'm doing it if we just talk it out like normal people. Either way, at the end of the day, these are just my opinions. You don't have to agree with everything I'm saying, but you do have to respect what I'm bringing to the table. Now let's just close out everything with a good old retro outro.
If you want to turn me on, stay your own, don't spare the tone, and grow a little soul.